بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ورمضان كريم عليكم جميعا. Dear attendees, we are welcoming you to this webinar and we hope that you will gain more information about the topic that we will be presenting. I believe that technology is a tool, not a goal, whether in the library or educational field. So all libraries and educational institutions must use all kinds of technology, not to show off, but to use it to improve their performance and processes aimed to providing better services to their users. Today, we will talk about one of the most common and beneficial technology. We will talk about artificial intelligence from different aspects, define, identify ways artificial intelligence can be used in library and educational settings, and last but not least, talk about the ethics of using it in library and education areas. Our speaker is not new to Naseej Academy. We had her before in a previous webinar as she talked about augmented reality and virtual reality in library. And it was a very successful webinar. And I expect that will be the same for today's webinar, inshallah. Let me welcome Dr. Lauren Heiss, Assistant Professor of Educational Technology at the University of Central Missouri in the United States of America. Dr. Lauren currently teaches professional development courses on augmented reality and virtual reality for K-12 teachers. Previously, she was an instructional and research librarian at a private liberal arts university. Please, Dr. Lauren, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Excuse me. And thank you everyone for being here. Afternoon my time, evening your time. So just thanks again for taking the time to be here. Again, the title of this session is Artificial Intelligence in Library and Educational Settings, Concerns and Opportunities. So we will be both looking at what is possible, what may be coming in the future, as well as ending with some concerns around ethical issues, and then one method for how to address some of those ethical issues that may arise with the use of artificial intelligence. So again, you've heard this, but I am currently an assistant professor of educational technology at the University of Central Missouri, and previously I worked as an instructional and research librarian. So I have had work experience for about almost a decade, almost 10 years as a librarian, and then am now working more directly with educational technology at the University of Central Missouri. So the outcomes for the session today are to be able to describe artificial intelligence, identify ways AI can be used in library and educational settings, and then to consider the ethics of using AI in educational settings. My presentation will last right around an hour, and then we will leave the last 30 minutes or so for questions. Certainly, if you have questions, please feel free to jot those down. We'll come back to them later on in the presentation, and I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts and questions at the end. So let's start with just the kind of overarching question so that we're all on the same page. What is artificial intelligence? So here is kind of one definition: that AI is a computer system that is able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and understanding human knowledge. So some examples of artificial intelligence that you may be familiar with are, Google, the Google HomePod, Amazon, like Alexa, Siri on your Apple device. So these are some things that are kind of integrated into everyday life, even like a robot vacuum. older versions of robot vacuums did not have artificial intelligence built in, but modern robot vacuums do, because as it moves around a house to kind of learn where the furniture is and to move around different objects, it is actually learning what it needs to go around until it can learn to be the most efficient in its vacuuming of a person's home. Google Maps, or Maps from Apple or another site that update with real-time traffic alerts, is another example of artificial intelligence that we use, but may not think about it as artificial intelligence, but yet it is monitoring traffic patterns, whether traffic jams, if there was an accident, and it's taking all of those things into consideration and calculating how long it will take to get from one destination to the next. Another example that we often use in education is a plagiarism checker. And this can be an example of artificial intelligence because it's examining a person's paper, and it is reading through, looking for instances of when particular passages may have come from another source. And then the graduate record exam, the GRE test, which is used kind of widely in the United States to get into graduate school, they have started using what they're calling robo-readers, so a robot to read through some of the essays that are a part of the GRE test and determine what score a person should get based on what the robo-reader reads. Now, the GRE also uses a human reader, and if the scores are vastly different, then another human will come in and compare the scores. But if the scores between the human and the robo-reader are the same, or very similar, then there's a consensus on what score the person should receive, and another person would not come to confirm that that is a reliable number. So if you're familiar with validity and reliability and assessment, the robo-reader is helping to determine the reliability by giving the same GRE score that a human reader would give. Because typically, in previous instances where you're doing a graduate exam test with an essay, more than one reader is often needed to make sure that the scores are going to be similar to ensure reliable results. So those are just kind of some examples of things that are included in our everyday lives with artificial intelligence, things we may not realize or think of as artificial intelligence, but it is certainly all around us in ways that we may not be aware of. And that, I think, is one reason to just think about the more uses of artificial intelligence in both libraries and education. And I gave one example of plagiarism checkers and then the GRE here, but we're going to look at more specific examples of how they're already being used in the presentation a bit in the future. So I've given some examples of AI, but let's look at some other ones that are maybe new to you or are outside of what we maybe think about on a day-to-day basis. And so this list does come from the URL. You'll see the URL there at the bottom, but AI is being included in manufacturing robots. So these are occurring on assembly lines for car manufacturing. Any sort of manufacturing plant is often using robots to help with the manufacturing process. There are self-driving cars that use artificial intelligence. There are smart assistants. This could be something like Siri, but could also be another assistant that helps us, even something as simple as you've probably written an email and it starts to fill in the next words that it thinks that you might be wanting to type. That is an example of artificial intelligence. Another example is proactive health management. So this is often in, it's health diagnostics, and it's where AI can make some determinations about what could happen in the future based on your current management of your health. So, kind of what you're eating, how much exercise you're getting, and then it can make some decisions based on the knowledge that the artificial intelligence possesses about future outcomes for your health. Disease mapping is another example of how artificial intelligence is being used. We can see this, with the growth of, the spread of viruses and how it can be mapped, and decisions and modeling is made to determine what they think will happen in the future. Automated financial investing. So AI is certainly involved in the financial system, and the example that you would see if you went to the website that I have there at the bottom is specifically, it's called Betterment, and it's an automated financial investing platform, and they use what they call a robo-advisor, actually, that uses AI to learn about a specific investor, so a specific person, and then the robo-advisor builds a personalized portfolio based on that person's financial plans. So that's just another way that AI is getting involved. In a sense, it's your financial planner. A virtual travel booking agent, somebody that books all of your, it's AI that books all of your travel and it can give you recommendations based on interests and where you might want to go. Social media monitoring. Often you can set up an AI to tweet, to post on Facebook or other social media account for companies. And many social media kind of companies that have used algorithms, they also suggest people that we can follow that might have similar interests as us, or things they know that we're interested in, that we want to learn more about. There's recommendations based on that. An inter-team chat tool. This is another example where something like, Slack, you've probably maybe used that before with Slack bots. That's part of artificial intelligence. It's certainly in marketing, and then again in natural language processing as well. So again, you can see from this list that artificial intelligence is in almost all parts of our lives, and it's there whether we're fully aware of it or not. So I want to show you, I have a few slides here that I'm going to go through that have some examples of artificial intelligence that I think are some have low barrier to entry. And what I mean is they're fairly basic. They're not very robust, but they give an idea of how you can kind of use and interact with artificial intelligence. And I think they're good ways to introduce students to artificial intelligence, especially if they don't realize how broadly it's being used already in the world. So these are just some tools that, again, have that low barrier to entry. So the first one is MixLab. And this is a tool that was created by Google that lets you mix music with your voice, actually. And you can tell the computer what instruments to add, what beats that you want to use. You can, say that you want to add a keyboard, a bass, drums, a guitar. You can also describe the specific type of sound that you want. So you could say, add some jazz drums, or, add low bass, whatever it is, whatever sound you're looking for. And I've included the links here. So I do want to just kind of jump out to each of them briefly so you can see what it looks like. So this is the site, MixLab. You can preview it. And I don't have the mic set up to do this, so we're not going to hear anything. But if you were testing this out, you could give microphone access, then, say add keyboard. Maybe you say you want to add, some folk music or whatever music that you kind of want to hear. So add some jazz keyboard, and then it will change it and add things, and you can create your own sound. This is, I think, a good example to see how artificial intelligence can work just with using your voice. So the next example is speech notes, and this allows you to enable voice typing on any site. It can also be a really great transcription tool, which I think is another use of artificial intelligence that we often don't realize is artificial intelligence. Anything with like automatic closed captions, that's an example of artificial intelligence at work. But with speech notes, you can create an audio file. You could upload it here to, select different programs, transcribe files here anytime, and I think it works really fast. So I think it can be a really great feature to enable that voice typing and transcription. There we go. I don't think I missed a slide. Okay. Teachable Machine is another example, and this is a way to train your computer to recognize images and sounds. And this is another product with Google. Google does have kind of a market on some of these initial AI tools. But I do really encourage you to kind of play around with these if some of them sound interesting to you. But you can certainly watch the video. I'm not going to show the video during this presentation, but it gives you some specific examples of how you would, get images, maybe images of a dog, images of birds, whatever it is that you want to train the computer to recognize. You could categorize them, and then you could export the model to sites or apps. And it could be a great way just to have other people like determine, okay, this is a dog, this is a cat, or if something that might not be quite as easy to differentiate, different types of butterflies or different types of millipedes, whatever it is that might be a bit more challenging to identify, the computer can help you with that with different images. Trying to go back and forth. My computer's being slow. So another example here is AI experiments. One thing to note about the AI experiments is that you can't interact with this tool. It's just examples of experiments that other people have done. So they call it a showcase of simple experiments with AI that to start exploring. They really focus a lot on machine learning, which is an area of artificial intelligence. But there are one that I found really interesting, especially because how it relates to education, is this AI in writing that you will see right here. And in this kind of collection of AI experiments, they set out to explore whether machine learning could be used by writers to help their writing process, to maybe help them with a writer's block, to help them to be more creative, to just find ways to add value to the process that they go through as writers. And there are 3 specific experiments that came out of this project. The first one, or the third one, I guess, here that you see is Between the Lines. And this was a plot building tool where machine learning can help fill in the gaps between plot points. And then this one, the second one here, Once Upon a Time, it's a character life story generator where writers input keywords that describe a life they want to generate, perhaps like the biography of the character, and then they get a complete life story that draws from the keywords that they added to the system. And then BanterBot is a character chatbot where the writer supplies information about their character, and then they can converse with it through the text. As you interact with that bot, which is in a sense the character that you created. The character kind of evolves, taking the conversation to new places, and then you as the writer can learn from that. So I think these are really fascinating examples of how AI can be incorporated into education, something like the writing process. I also think this is an example of maybe a concern. Does this actually stifle the learning process? I don't know that we have enough data to really tell us whether it does enrich that learning process or if it hinders the learning process, or in this case, the specific writing project. Perhaps it could be both, but I think it's a question that we need to ask ourselves, and more research really does need to be done to determine how AI used in this way may impact future stories, future fiction work that we read, future movies that we might see. We don't know. I don't think at this point, there's just not enough research out there, but it's certainly, I think, an opportunity to pause, reflect on what we might need to learn, and go from there. So Scratchbot is another tool. This can be used actually to create a chatbot. You have likely interacted with a chatbot in some form on the internet prior to this. Scratchbot is a fairly basic programming tool, but nonetheless gives an opportunity for someone to create a chatbot and to start understanding how they function and how information that is given by a user, how that was created on the back end, so that how the chatbot reacts and responds is a little bit more visible to someone. And I think what they do here is really interesting. They kind of give you a good list for how to create a chatbot, and it gives examples of how you can put things together, kind of so if they do this, it would say this, etc. And so you can scroll through here. I won't spend a lot of time. I encourage you to come back and explore it on your own, but this might be something, I've used this in classes before where I've asked students to create a basic chatbot just so they can kind of understand the process and see how artificial intelligence works, again, at a very basic level. So I decided to throw in one AR, so augmented reality example, just because I talked about augmented reality in my last session. And so there is also a experiment, just like there is with the AI experiments with Google, are augmented reality experiments that Google has put together as well. So you could come here. I won't spend too much time talking about it, but just if you do have interest in augmented reality, you can come and see some of the examples that are posted here as well. And then this site was created from some MIT researchers. And you can, it's really kind of fascinating, where you can it's again machine learning. It can help individuals recognize emotions on faces. So it is geared toward younger students. But you can get the code from it and start kind of using it yourself. It's on CodeLab. So you just put in codelab.cognates.com, and then you would be able to see everything that is there. Waiting a second to flip back to the PowerPoint. I have too many tabs open now. There we go. Okay. So as I said, I wanted to just share kind of some of those basic examples of how you might, these are things you could include in a class session just to introduce students to artificial intelligence, but also see just the kind of a variety of ways that artificial intelligence is being used. So you can save these to the end. We can look in the chat, but go ahead and post them if you want. If there are other ideas or other examples of AI that you want to just share with the group, go ahead and share them now. People can scroll through them now or later, but I know that we all have a lot of experience, and so that we have a lot to share with each other. So now we're going to focus more on using AI in libraries. So IFLA, the International Federation for Libraries, actually published a statement on artificial intelligence in 2020. And the policy statement outlines key considerations for the use of AI in libraries, and then suggests roles which libraries should, they say specifically, should strive to take on in a society with growing AI integration. And that's a direct quote there about what the goal of this statement that they published was. Further, and I know this is a kind of a lengthy statement here that I am just going to go ahead and read, so forgive me for that, but I think it's important to really understand the purpose behind this document. So it says, the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning systems in private and public spheres is rapidly growing. How can these developments impact both everyday practices and the broader social mission of libraries? IFLA's new statement sets out some key principles. The rapid pace of AI development and adoption raises crucial questions about intellectual freedom, equity and privacy, automation, the evolution of necessary digital literacy skills, relevant intellectual property policy frameworks, and more. This new statement aims to outline key considerations for the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies in the library sector. And then here's where that quote that I was saying earlier comes from, and suggests the roles which libraries should strive to take on in a society with growing AI integration. So let's look at this document in a little bit more detail here. So they're saying that there's kind of three areas that IFLA describes for how libraries can work with AI and provide resources around artificial intelligence. So one of those is that AI can be used by library staff. So that includes integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies into everyday work. This could be something like using a chatbot for basic reference questions. You know, if somebody asks the library hours, that there is just an automatic response given to that. And so that would be an example of artificial intelligence use in the library. It could also be that artificial intelligence is used for cataloging, so in technical services, in determining keywords for a source. So using some of those, what are the best subject terms, based on information that the artificial intelligence knows about a particular resource. Libraries can also educate users about artificial intelligence. So I think this is a really great opportunity for librarians to think about digital literacy skills, to think about how others in society are interacting with artificial intelligence, and then to provide workshops about this technology. It could be that, some people just don't realize because it gets so ingrained often in what we do, and we don't realize it's artificial intelligence, that people just want to be aware of when they might be engaging with artificial intelligence already. Or it could be, future opportunities that you'd be teaching about with artificial intelligence, and how artificial intelligence may impact the workforce in the future. Those are all things to consider. And then lastly, IFLA states that libraries can support high quality ethical research around AI. So, everything from providing literature, conducting literature searches, making sure that the resources are available for others to read about how AI is impacting society, impacting individuals, impacting sectors of the workforce. So just making sure that we have the research available for others, helping to conduct literature reviews, helping to conduct other types of reviews, whether it's an integrative review or scoping review, things like that. But just again, being supportive of the research that is being conducted on AI can be another role for librarians to take on. So it can be really challenging, I think, to stay up to date on artificial intelligence, because I feel like, at least from my experience, it's moving very fast, and yet it's not as fast as sometimes I feel like it should be, based on maybe movies that I've seen in the past, or kind of the expectation of where we should be with AI. So it's this strange, I feel like we're in a strange place in some ways with artificial intelligence, where I feel like we should be farther along, but yet we can do a lot because it is so ingrained in our everyday lives. So there's a few things that I just want to, as you're thinking as an education worker, okay, how do I stay up to date? Maybe you do want to provide some training on AI in your own context for your own education stakeholders, your own library users. And so there is a newsletter called The Batch. And I'll just go ahead and type that here in the chat. And that should go out to that can be a good newsletter to read. Medium can be another great source. Just make sure that you check the AI and data science as topics of interest in order to start following people and publications that have interests in artificial intelligence. And then there are many artificial intelligence researchers on Twitter, actually, that send out a lot of information. So then, back to this IFLA document. It has a lot of great information, and I do encourage you to read it for yourself. It's not terribly long, but it is full of a lot of really useful information. And this is, these are things where appropriate and where possible, because I know that we're all stretched thin in what we're able to accomplish, and sometimes understaffed. So where possible and where interests lie, IFLA suggests that libraries can, help patrons, again, with that training, continue to focus efforts on lifelong learning, and help individuals maybe scale up some of their skills in interacting or using artificial intelligence. Ensure that any use of our AI technologies in libraries is using clear ethical standards, and procure technologies that adhere to legal and ethical privacy and accessibility requirements. So one area that sometimes we don't often think about with artificial intelligence, but that's already incorporated a lot into libraries, is with the databases that we subscribe to. And there is often an AI component embedded into many of those databases. EBSCOhost, which is a platform with a lot of databases. That is something that artificial intelligence is built in with some searching mechanisms, and it's worthwhile to, I think, really read through a lot of those privacy agreements and accessibility requirements to make sure that the data that is being collected and used from those databases is information that we are comfortable letting those companies have access to. But also making sure that we're sharing that information with library users so that they can make informed decisions. about the data they might be giving to these companies who gather data. But when there's artificial intelligence kind of involved in it, I think it takes it to a whole nother level, because the artificial intelligence and machine learning can, start learning about individuals and what they search and start building a profile around them in ways that previously wouldn't have been able to occur. The IFLA document also includes some specific suggestions for library trainers and library associations. And it says, and again, these are directly from the IFLA document, that that trainers and associations should consider supporting library professionals to understand the impact of AI, as well as intersections with privacy and ethical principles. The trainers and associations should advocate for libraries to play a bigger role in changing education systems as they adapt to the labor market with the changes that occur from AI. Engage with AI researchers and developers to create applications for library use. So that could be a really great partnership that I could see occurring. Libraries partnering with the AI companies to focus in on what library users need and libraries want, but that also consider ethical principles. And then trainers and associations can act as forums for exchanging ideas about AI technology and how to use it well. So I already talked about databases as being one place that AI shows up in libraries, and specifically even search recommendations can be an example of AI at work. Other examples that I mentioned, chatbots and how those can answer simple reference questions. They can certainly ask more in-depth answer more in-depth research questions if the chatbot itself is robust enough to be able to do that. Basic reference questions could easily be answered with something as simple as the Scratchbot that I showed you earlier, because you could set it up for reference question. What I mean by reference questions, forgive me, let me go back. What I mean is like library hours, some of those kind of really straightforward that you're going to give the same answer to every time the question is asked. But there are certainly companies out there that have the capability of chatbots to do much more than that. Another example of AI in libraries is content indexing. So I did mention about how AI can show up in technical services. And this is, again, one area where I think I see a lot of growth and a lot of potential in this area. There's also a lot of potential for ethical concerns, I believe, with this, because you're taking a lot of that human element out of it, where humans are making the decision about subject terms and where an item should go in a physical collection. But I do see artificial intelligence being used more for this content indexing purposes in the future. Other examples of AI are when suggestions are given for relevant articles. This is certainly something that I see with Google Scholar. When I conduct a search in there, it will give me a list that gives me a list of other articles that it believes are relevant based on the one article that are the content that I might have searched and the one article that I'm looking at. That's an example of kind of the very kind of basic use of AI, because it is matching keywords to other articles. And then another example is with impact factor. In the future, I think an algorithm could be capable of kind of breaking down scientific research into arguments and validating them against other pieces of research. So it would really be able to potentially do I don't want to say better job, but it could do a job of seeing the impact of a particular argument on other research that's published in the future, the way that people practice, whether it's they're practicing in medicine or, in the law, however they make, humans make decisions in the future and how they act. You could do a bit more tracing to see if it was impacted by a particular argument in a particular publication.
Lauren, if you allow me just to interrupt you just for a second to
Yes.
if someone just needs to ask a question, so he can just write it down in the Q&A answer and or in the chat box, so we can answer it at the end of the presentation. Just that one. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for answering that. I appreciate that. So again, I'm just going to put out there that maybe you have seen some other examples of AI already in your library settings. And I mentioned this kind of earlier with this previous question. If there are anything else you'd like to share with the broader audience, go ahead and put that in the Q&A so that others can see those examples. Just because I do think that it is important and we all have a lot of knowledge that we can share with each other. So we've been talking about AI kind of generally, AI in libraries. Now we're going to focus in more on using AI in education and start with some examples of everyday use of AI in education. So the first one here is with personalized learning. This is likely a concept that you're familiar with, but the idea is that personalized learning, it's currently a really big trend, but that pathway almost is set for a student. And what can happen is that they're given a program, maybe on a computer, and then based on their answers to a few kind of initial questions, the computer program adjusts to the kind of where the learner is on their learning journey. So it becomes harder and asks more advanced questions if the learner was able to quickly answer that initial set of questions, or if they were not able to successfully answer that initial set of questions, they move to, it becomes a bit easier and steps back to what may be considered review, or if maybe the student didn't learn it, they came from a different school, they had a different experience, so they need to go back a few steps. And so learning can be personalized through a computer program, adjusting to where the learner is with their current knowledge, and then helping that knowledge to grow over time, but yet not leaving anyone behind, because it adjusts to where they are on their learning journey. So personalized learning is one example of AI in education. Another example is an artificial intelligence tutor. So this can be connected to personalized learning, but an AI tutor can be almost something like a chatbot, but a little bit more robust than that. But that can answer questions about a particular homework assignment, can point a learner to particular resources that they may find valuable for their learning journey. It could be a video, it could be a book that they might want to read, an article, whatever type of resource it is, that tutor can point them to that. It could also help them break down a math problem and explain the particular elements of it, or help them understand the different parts of a cell. It can help with all of those different pieces. Another example of AI in education is task automation for instructors. And what I mean by this is that it can grade papers, especially if we talked about, those robo readers on the GRE at the very beginning of the session. So we know that artificial intelligence can look at, essays and short answer questions, but it can much more easily and without needing a human really to read as well. It can, grade multiple choice exams, true, false, and just automatically put the scores into the grade book. It can identify, learning patterns or how much time students are spending in the learning management system, and then, draw conclusions about effort or where students might need to spend more time if they are being successful or unsuccessful. So a lot of those kind of learning analytics, which I'll get to in a second, but the task automation can be useful for that as well. So the next one is just increased access. And what I mean by increased access is that learning opportunities can become more global and more available for students through the use of artificial intelligence. And this can be students, it can be all students. So students maybe with a disability can be introduced to a new learning opportunity through the use of AI. One example is that, there's like if I give a presentation in Zoom or give a presentation in PowerPoint, that there's that automatic translation or closed captioning, I guess I should say, that comes up. I use this a lot in PowerPoint presentations, that there's that closed captioning piece, and that can just be very useful for students. So it gives them, gives some of my students increased access to learning opportunities, but again, for all students. And then learning analytics. I mentioned this just briefly a second ago, but I think it's such an important piece here because there is a lot that can be drawn from learning analytics, and I think the use of learning analytics is only increasing. But specifically with AI, we can obviously generate reports from learning analytics, but artificial intelligence can also look at those analytics and it can draw conclusions from the reports that we may be able to see patterns, but sometimes the AI can see patterns a lot faster than us. And so the information that it's gathering from within the learning management system, artificial intelligence can say, students are really struggling with this objective or, this skill. And this is something that maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't yet as the instructor, and you would then know, okay, I need to go back and reteach that. So that's just one example of how artificial intelligence can draw some conclusions from the learning analytics that are being gathered, and that could be through grades. Often it is through the grades that are being given, especially if certain questions on a quiz or a test are aligned with a particular objective, then the AI can come and see which objectives are not being met at the same level by by a large portion of the class, or even again by individual students. And you would know that those individual students need to be, you need to have some targeted assignments for them to help get them back up. And that's again where personalized learning can come in. So just as I've done with kind of the other three main sections, if there are other examples that you have of AI in education settings that you'd like to share with the group, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I think that would be a good opportunity for everyone to, again, hear from all of us. So as we are getting close to the end, I want to just kind of share some resources, and then we're going to have a little bit of time here to still talk about the ethics. But ISTE, so the International, I always just say ISTE. I'm going to draw a blank on what it's actually called. But technology education There is a particular section here on artificial intelligence in education that I've linked. It is one of their areas of focus. And so there are some specific examples of how to engage students. And again, these are often K-12 students, but I think it can, even if you're working in higher education, it can give you a really good idea of what can be done. And then you can scale it appropriately for your student group. But you could look at some of these, guides to see how artificial intelligence can be incorporated into the classroom and how you can engage them. And you'll see here that they are in different languages, which I thought might be particularly helpful. So again, this is just a really good resource for you to take into account. So thinking about the future, I think, as we think about AI in libraries and education a little bit, together, we're looking at a future where AI helps with more increased automation. Maybe we want that, maybe we don't, but I think that is one of the few things that we're going to see in the future, that it's going to be used in, AI is going to be used really in all sectors in some capacity. So all workforce sectors. And, for those of us who work in education, because it's going to be so widely used, helping our students understand even just a little bit about it, I think will really be beneficial for them in the future. That there'll be an increased use in data. We're already seeing data used widely in many different capacities. Not all maybe the best, but I think it is certainly only going to increase as artificial intelligence growth occurs. And then we're also going to see a removal of some human elements occur because AI will take the spot. Do I think that means that AI is going to mean work doesn't need to happen anymore and that, robots will just do everything? No, I don't think that at all. I don't think we're going to get there, at least not anytime soon, but there will be, we're already seeing, some of these things occur with some jobs, that there is more, automation and AI, especially on like assembly lines, that there's a removal of some of those human elements. So now let's talk about ethics. There is a lot of concern around the use of AI in terms of how it could discriminate, how it could introduce bias, how it can take away privacy, and how it does remove that human element. Bias can be introduced because of a bias that might be present in an individual, and they can write things into code that they don't understand the consequences for. And we just know how companies want to gather data so that they can target, whether it's marketing, whether it's advertising, whatever it is that they're trying to do, what their goal is. We all know the importance of data to large companies. So that's where privacy is often removed. In education, when we think about the ethics of AI, we often need to remember that when we're gathering data in particular and plan to use that data, especially if we want to share that data outside of the classroom, that goes to a level of research that we really need to run through an institutional review board and gather informed consent. So people need to be aware of what data is being gathered on them, especially when minors are included. And it could be that parents or guardians do need to give consent for their students to be involved in some of this data gathering with AI as well. I think another ethical concern with AI in education is just there's a lot of research, and we know this about just human development, about the importance of human connections in learning. That we are social creatures, and we do learn through social interactions. And I'm thinking of Albert Bandura as one example with his social learning theory. and just how that is a key connection. And I'm not saying that artificial intelligence is going to remove that human element, but especially when we're talking about that personalized learning and how so much of it can occur on a device with a computer system, we just want to be aware of how much we're letting the computer do the teaching. And I mean, I teach educational technology, so I think it's really important that we use that technology, but I also think, and I tell my students this all the time, that being a good user of educational technology means knowing when to use it and when not to use it. And there are times that we don't want to use it. So I co-wrote a paper that was published last year about using kind of like an ethical approach with the use of, particularly around teaching coding, so teaching computer science in schools. But we used this framework by Maynor that was published in 2002. You'll see the in-text citation, and then the final citation for that article is on the reference list in a later slide, so you'll see it there. But his ethical framework includes kind of 4 elements. And I think this is a good framework to use when you're thinking about teaching, students about artificial intelligence, and then also using artificial intelligence yourself. So identify stakeholders, identify values, identify, and often ethical values trump non-ethical values. And that if 2 ethical values conflict, the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number wins. So that is the framework that he created. And let me give kind of an example of this. So here's a scenario about how this would work in practice. So it says a group of middle school students are working on a coding project, and their task is to design a technology that will help others. The group decides to write code that will trigger a camera to record video of children playing on the playground so they can identify when a child has been bullied. The teacher wants to encourage students to think more critically about this idea. And so they kind of walk through the ethical framework for this. So if they identify the stakeholders, the questions that they might want to ask is who is involved, who will be affected, who will be helped, and who will be hurt. They want to identify values. So then what is the value of the project? What are the reasons we should create this project? What are the reasons we should not create this project? What will happen if? And here, here are some scenarios to think about. And you could, of course, ask many of these same questions no matter what the scenario is. And then the asking that if question is really key to that process. What will happen if any of these other scenarios happen? Will it hurt people? Will it help people? Who may it help? Who may it hurt? Things to think about. Do any of these concerns fall within one of the core human values? And so Maynor in his article lists kind of those ethical values, those core human values as life, health, happiness, security, resources, opportunities, knowledge, and privacy. So do any of the concerns that, we listed above fall within one of those areas? And if 2 ethical values conflict, the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number wins. So then a question might be, is there a way to modify this system to produce more good for more people? Especially if you're recognizing that some of your stakeholders are going to potentially be hurt by this. And so what would be the outcome? So hopefully, I think looking at that ethical framework, hopefully it can be helpful. I encourage you to maybe explore it in a little bit more detail. Again, I'll put up the slide at the end with the full citation for Maynor's framework. So I do want to just kind of mention 2 other resources that might be beneficial for you. There's the Center for Humane Technology, and then ethicalarresources.com. Both that can be good places to go if you want to explore more about kind of the ethical use of AI in particular, even technology more broadly. Both have a lot of great resources available. but I think it can be just even good conversation starters for how AI is impacting our lives, how it could impact our lives in the future, and how we may want to include it or we may not want to incorporate it in our lives. So I mentioned that I would put up the articles. This is the article I wrote that kind of gives maybe a little bit more information on that framework. This is where that framework comes from. Sorry, my dog's barking.
That gives us more humanity atmosphere. So don't worry, sir. It's good just to feel the environment that you live in. Enjoy it. Go ahead for listening.
Yeah, no, so this is the references, but yeah, I think it's, we are right at an hour. So now it is time for questions.
I can tell your lovely dog just have the alarm with him so he can do it exactly at the time that you finish. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. So I see some questions.
Yeah.
Are you going to read the questions?
Yes, I will manage it. But first of all, I would like to thank you, Lawrence, so much for this interesting and informative presentation. I can feel that it gives really another angle to look at the artificial intelligence, its application for in both library or education area, especially with those many examples that you gave during your presentation, whether it's a chatbot or writing stories or avoiding plagiarism in the library context, or even the personalized learning or learning analytics in the education era. Me, myself, just like the example scenario very well. It is very articulate and draw the whole image in a very concise just. So thank you again. And now let's move to the questions. And I would prefer to start with old and renewable one about is there any effect of the staff or the human factor in the library of even the education area when we apply the artificial intelligence? This is, I think, related to the statement you mentioned about removing the human element. So I think this gives some of our audience a little bit feeling euphoria about it. Can you elaborate more about this? Do you think there is any effect about the human factor here, whether in libraries or education?
Yeah, so I hope I will try to answer that the best I can, and if I'm not answering it the way that you intended, please feel free to type in the chat another question that follows up on that. But that human factor in libraries and education, I think, is, as I mentioned, really important, and artificial intelligence removes it, and yet it also at the same time does provide support that also at the same time provide in a way that maybe a human couldn't provide, because they might not see the same things in terms of they may not see the data, and they might not be able to as quickly make the adjustment for that personalized learning piece. So in some ways, the artificial intelligence can, I don't want to say better, but I think in some ways there are times where it could be better to provide support and learning opportunities for students. But alternatively, it does remove just the human connection. So that can be made and can encourage a student to move forward on their learning journey, and just that kind of just connection. So in many ways, what I see here as being really important is that humans and AI find a way to work together in order to be as successful as possible and provide the best educational and learning opportunities that we can. I hope I answered that the way that
yeah, and one of our attendees just summarized it by saying that we can't get rid of the humanization of the librarian within the artificial. Maybe he added more humanization on the AI and just leave the routine processes or routine job for the AI. So I think you answered in a very manner and good way. Another story we received whether here or in the social accounts here about the cost. Do you think that the cost could be passed by the library, especially they are suffering from financial issues?
That is one of the reasons why I was a little hesitant and, said where possible and, because we are, libraries do often have staffing concerns and budget concerns that we have to be aware of. And it's never my goal to put more on people. I think we all do the best we can. That said, I think if, libraries look at their goals, and if one of their goals is to provide learning opportunities, to provide access to technology, to support workers, all of those areas are areas where artificial intelligence can play a role. And so I think that you can align our instruction on artificial intelligence with goals that many libraries already have. So it could be that we decide to drop something else that maybe isn't as aligned with one of our goals, but that's just something each individual library and library staff will have to determine.
Perfect. Thank you. And again, I just confirmed on any question can be written just to give the chance for all attendees. Another question is related to this is come from Fatima Al-Husseini. Application of AI in assessment of student performance, not just in educate them. So, can you give just more elaboration about this, the assessment of the student performance using AI, please, Lauren?
Dr. Abdullah, please raise your voice.
Okay. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the question is about the using AI in assessment of the student performance, not just to educate them. Please, Lauren.
Yes, so I do think that artificial intelligence has a lot of opportunity for assessment. As I mentioned, that there are, it can be really used in all different types of assessment, but that the kind of reliability of that assessment data needs to be verified to make sure that the AI is giving us the data that we as humans would deem accurate. So definitely, bringing in a human to read articles, to read essays, to determine that. I'm not sure if I answered that correctly. Is that what they were getting at?
Yes, thank you. Another question here is about the integration between the AI program within the library consortium. Do you think that it could be an issue for the libraries?
Yes, I do think it could be an issue.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if I do. I don't know if I have anything else to really add to that.
I think if they follow the very high level of standards, and I think this type of program that could be easy to adapt will reduce a little bit the conflict could be presented down the road. But let me see your input in that, please.
I completely agree with what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have another question here. It's okay. Is it mandatory for librarian to be IT professional to apply AI in his or her library, or there should be IT expert within the library staff?
That's a really good question. I think all librarians need to have a basic understanding of artificial intelligence. One of the reasons for that is because of how AI is starting to show up in databases that we use and resources that we point our patrons to. So that said, I would never expect all librarians to become artificial intelligence experts or conducting research or even building AI themselves. I don't think that's really the job description of a librarian.
Yes.
That said, I think that there is a place in libraries in the future, maybe even today, for some individuals who have particular skills in artificial intelligence to be thinking about how artificial intelligence can be used for things like indexing and technical services, for even gathering research on a particular topic. All libraries are not going to have the need or a staff person to do that, but I think this could be a role that a larger university might want to consider, having somebody conduct research in it, and maybe there only needs to be one or two in an area, but I can see there being a need for somebody who really understands both libraries and how reference works and research and technical services works, and also who really understands AI.
Perfect. Thank you for this telegraphed answer. Can you give more enlightenment on using AI, creating the impact factor, please?
For creating the what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Impact factor.
Oh, impact factor. Yes. So I might not have described that very well. But so thinking about impact factor today, we know that impact factors are determined by things like how many times an article was cited, how many times, we could look at like alt metrics, or how many times an article was mentioned on social media, or discussed in a lecture, or those are different types of metrics, but they all have to do with impact factor. And I think artificial intelligence can start looking at impact factor even more broadly than kind of alternative metrics, because it could gather the data that the alternative metrics gathers. So social media mentions in maybe lectures, so that the recordings of those lectures, it could start pulling that data, but it could also start looking at, and this is, we might be a few years off from this, I think we are, but it could start looking for how individuals change behavior, or how organizations even change their actions and decisions based on published research, or based on really based on published research. So it could look at impact of an article in ways that we currently can't, because what we have to look at right now are specific citations or mentions or discussions. We can't really look at behavior, but we could in the future with artificial intelligence.
Thank you. And, we have a question from Mr. Ali. He said that, how can libraries and their services be marketed using AI to be more recognizable?
That's a good question too. So there's already a lot of really good marketing tools and advertising. I mean, Google is probably the biggest example, and what they do is they gather a lot of data on their users and then target advertising to those users. In many ways, libraries could potentially do some of the same things, kind of piggybacking on existing Google, we could be more targeted in, buying a Google ad and letting people know that our resources are available. So that's one way. I don't know. I mean, there's probably ethics involved in that we have to talk about, but we could, again, piggyback on the AI that already exists to get our services and market it a bit more broadly. Other than that, I mean, we'd have to start thinking about, okay, what, I'm trying to think as I'm forming words, so forgive me for thinking here a second. We'd have to then, if we didn't do that, if we didn't piggyback on what was already in existence, we would have to think about hiring, somebody with some expertise in coding to be able to really build an AI tool that would get in front of more individuals.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a couple of questions come here. It's in Arabic, so I translated. It's about the effect of the AI on the paper book. So is still this struggle or this conflict about that having the book in the traditional original format, which is the book, will be affected by the AI?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So, I mean, most of my books are in physical format still. So
Me too. Me too.
So,
there is no conflict, I guess. Yeah.
But yeah. It's a really good question. Do I think there could potentially be some impact of AI on the physical book? Yes. And part of the reason is because AI can point users to specific material, and depending on how the code is written, which we'd have to look at it very closely, it could promote or kind of emphasize an electronic source over a physical book or even a physical magazine or newspaper. So I think the decisions on how information is brought back to a user, especially when they're doing a discovery search, for example, and they're it's federated search and they're bringing in information from a lot of different sources. How does the algorithm determine what's the top and what's the next one, and where do the physical resources fall? Yes, I mean, it very much could have an impact on what gets used and what doesn't get used.
Yeah, if I can elaborate more on this from my point of view, I think there is still this intimate relation between the reader and the book, the physical book. I'm still just the smell of the paper and this stuff could still having the bound between the reader and his physical book. But if we talk about the searchable features, the way that you can summarize things, as you mentioned, that we can just avoid plagiarism, or we can just make summary for something. So anything just needs to come from the meat of the content. I think AI will help with this, but having this very, very vivid relation between you and the book, and have it in your bed, and just trying to read this in a very close environment, I think it will not be ruined by any technology, not just AI. Any technology will not break the relation between the reader and the physical book. You still have, I assume that you still have your own book from your teenager or maybe from the childhood period. So I think it will be affected, but from the way that to speed up the taking out the content or the summary or the ideas. But reading physical books still having its intimacy, I guess. What do you think? Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. We have another question, so I try to stick to the time as much as I can. So I try to summarize or maybe take two or more questions in one shot. How does AI, the use of AI, influenced by the language, mainly the Arabic? Do you think that there is some feature, some elaboration will be or development will be happening when we use AI in Arabic language?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think it really speaks to the need for native language speakers to be involved in the development of AI products. Just because, you know, we want the diversity, we want the representation, we want the people who are going to be using it to be involved in the creation in their own language, because there could easily be misunderstandings that occur when a non-native speaker is trying to translate something at times. And so I think that just having people involved, you know, from all languages can really actually benefit and be really important in the creation of AI so that everyone can be involved in it. That, I don't know if I answered that very well or very articulately, but hopefully my point came across.
Yeah, sure. Another question is about how can we integrate blockchain and cloud technology with AI in higher education sector teaching, especially in medical science? It's a very specialized question. You got the points about the integration? Take your time because I know it's a little bit.
So integration,
in
integration in like the medical field, was that kind of is that, am I hitting that right?
Yeah, but mainly you can take it to a higher level, just focusing on the blockchain and the cloud, computing clouding, and the integration with AI.
Not sure I'm going to have a great answer for this question without thinking about it in a lot of detail, but I mean, artificial intelligence is certainly something that is related to a lot of the technology that is being created. I haven't seen a lot of, you know, connections between blockchain and artificial intelligence. That doesn't mean it's not out there. It just means I haven't read it yet. But I think there is a lot of connection between, you know, artificial intelligence and the cloud. Just because I think that's just where a lot of the information goes. It's gathered.
Perfect. I think we'll get with all my apology for the question that we get. We can take two more. Could AI eliminate the traditional librarian? I think we had this at the beginning, but maybe he is focusing about the type of the jobs that will be raised because of the AI. So the regular or the traditional job description that we used to have for librarian. What do you think about the new job that should be embedded or should be seen in the libraries when they use AI? The normal librarian, maybe we can see digital librarian, we can see another type of librarian.
Yes, so I think it's a good question. So in my mind, librarians our skill area is information access, and you know, and I think that is part of what AI does anyway. Yes, I think there are potentially some roles in libraries, and I feel bad saying this because I want everyone to do what they want to do, but that might not be as needed in the future because of things like AI, and we're already seeing this with other technologies, even like RFID. You know, we don't need it for the check-in, check-out, you know, the same way that, you know, we don't need someone to physically do that in the same way that we did before. So we're already seeing the kind of traditional roles of librarians change over the years. But I do think in the future, if we stay focused on information access and connecting users and individuals to the resources that they need, however that occurs, I think that librarians, whatever we call that role in the future, will be there. And it might be that we have some librarians who really do specialize in connecting individuals with resources through an artificial intelligence capacity. I haven't really thought about what exactly that might look like or how that might work, but now that we're having this conversation, I can see it happening in the future. We could probably dialogue about that for another hour, but
yeah, absolutely, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I can just end it up with a question. It's not a question, it's a request for doing such interesting webinars and workshops, not just about the AI, but another technology. This is what Naseej Academy did, and we are very grateful for Dr. Lauren. She joined us in talking about the AR and VR, and also here in AI. So we are very keen to have her again in another webinar at the time that she can be for us. We do thank you, Lauren, for this very, very outstanding and informative presentation and this flow of knowledge. I do appreciate that. Me, myself, just learned a lot from this session, all the sessions that you delivered. And for sure, we thank all our attendees for their participation and questions they raised. We just confirmed that the certificate and also the content will be, the certificate will be sent to you over the email you registered, and the content with the approval of Lauren and all our speakers. We always ask for this to be raised on the Naseej Academy portal. Thank you so much, and I leave the last word for you, Lauren, please.
I just want to say thank you again all for being here this evening. I recognize the time that you have given, so just thank you all, and I hope that you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Lauren. Bye-bye.
Thank you.